Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation on learning journeys, 3 keys to making them work. My name is David Witt. I'll be your host today. I'm speaking to you from the Ken Blanchard Companies headquarters in San Diego, California. I'm very excited to introduce my colleague who will be speaking to you from her home office in Minneapolis. My colleague Britney Cole is the Associate Vice President of Solution Architecture and Innovation Strategy for the Ken Blanchard Companies. With more than 15 years experience in organization development, performance improvement, and corporate training across all roles, Britney brings a pragmatic and diverse perspective to how adults desire to learn on the job. Britney comes to clients with a lens of who they are solving for first and foremost. Britney focuses on human-centric solutions, bringing design thinking and agile methodologies to her work and clients to create innovative, relevant, and meaningful experiences that create business impact. Britney, thank you so much for being here today and taking us through this presentation on learning journeys, 3 keys to making them work.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. And thanks, everyone, for joining me today. I am so excited to share over the next hour. And let's jump right in. First, I want to share that I have a dream job. It is amazing to be working for the Ken Blanchard Companies. I love coming to work each day. And it's been an amazing experience where I could take all of this work that I've amassed and experiences across different roles and different jobs across my past and bring them here to the Ken Blanchard Companies. And every day I get to work with my internal team and our clients, and we get to dream up solutions on how leadership development shows up and how we can make a difference in other people's lives. And so I'm grateful to be with you today. I'm grateful to share. And with that said, let's get this rolling. I don't have a ton of time with you, but I just want to let you know in advance as I go through this slide deck and share different resources on how to make learning journeys work. This will be shared with you today so you can take this and use this as tools in your toolbox to create human-centric designs. But first, before I go into the tools, the first thing I want to qualify is what exactly is a learning journey? You know, in the learning and development space, there's a lot of buzzwords. And even though learning journey seems fairly straightforward, when we talk about it, we tend to think of different things or different visions come into our mind. So, for instance, a learning journey can be something that's a program or experience. So, new frontline leader training, or onboarding for new senior leaders, or transitioning from one role to the next. So, it could be something that is the pre-work before you go to a formal program or an experience, and then the event where you're doing the different experiences and the interventions, all the stuff that happens, and then the post-work and the one-on-ones and the sustainment and the support that you have after. So a learning journey could be that micro program or one-time event, but it also could be a series of events or experiences. So it could be that leadership development journey, but it happens over the course of time where you kick off. And then maybe you have a live event where you learn about how you build trust and the foundations of leadership development at your company. And then it goes into maybe coaching or SL2, where you're deepening your skills on how you have effective one-on-one conversations. And maybe it graduates further until you have an experience where you learn about how to manage a team. So it's a journey that weaves and connects all of those different programs together, but there's some connective tissue that still exists. Or a journey could be your entire career, from when you start as an individual contributor and you focus on leading self, to then going into a leadership position where you're leading people one-on-one, to leading teams, to all the way leading a function. And so a learning journey could be, again, that micro program or that macro career. I think in terms of what we're going to talk about today, it's going to touch on all of these. But I also think when we think about buzzwords in L&D, let's not think too much about it, because fundamentally, and I'm bringing in a quote from Ken, is when you stop learning, you stop growing. So truly, you might say we're always on a journey to some extent. And so when we think about what we're going to focus on in terms of building learning journeys, as far as building capability, building knowledge and skills for that future leader, it's really going to focus on the program or the series of programs and how those programs all weave into each other. And so let's share those 3 keys. And then what I'll do is I'll go into detail on those 3 keys of making learning journeys work. So there's 3 pieces. And the first is it starts with who. Oftentimes when I get a request for, we need training or we need to do something because something's happening in the business that requires some intervention in which you're sharing knowledge and helping to upskill, is we often say, what are we solving for? And typically when you say, what are we solving for, you're going to get answers that are the what. Sales isn't, is lagging, or we're not retaining our people. We had poor engagement. We had poor engagement surveys. And I like to try a different question. And instead of what are we solving for, it's who are we solving for? Because by starting with your audience, you're still going to get the what, that, people are unhappy, but you're going to also really humanize and really know who your audience is and start to understand what their needs and desires are. So that's the first key, and we'll talk about some tools that you can use so you can start with the who. The second one is you want to make sure it stays with the who. If we think about when we do empathy work, or we'll share a little bit about design thinking later in this hour, we talk about that who and we build that persona, but then it goes to the wayside and we start designing and we start building and we start implementing, and we start to forget who we're solving for because we're so in the weeds. So it's always important to go back to who are we solving for and what are the components that we need to consider so we can stay obsessed with that end user. We always want to make sure that we're on top of mind, that what we're doing is helping change hearts and minds, and thinking through what do we want people to say, do, think and feel, and think beyond just the learning event, but what is that experience that's helping move the needle. And with that, it always ends with outcomes. So what does success look like? If we know who we're solving for and we create an experience that they're going through, what's the end result? What's the, what are we trying to impact? And how does that show up in the business? How does that show up in the person? And how do you communicate that so you're actually demonstrating tangible value for the organization and for the employee? So we'll talk about a little bit about how we can do that and how we can track to that. All right. So let's kind of jump in that first key. So it starts with the who. And in my career, I've really adopted using design thinking as an approach where it helps me sort of wrap around learner experience design, because the first part of design thinking is empathize, and it's really learning about your audience. There's a lot of other parts. Really what we're going to focus on today is that empathize piece, understand who you're solving for, create learner personas that reflect not just your ideal learner, but your actual state of affairs and who you're dealing with, and who are the framework and the people in your organization. And then start to think about, again, how do we then build an experience that targets them and that builds relevancy and compels them to go through this experience. And one way to build persona, to empathize with your audience, is to build personas. So we'll talk a little bit about what that is and what that looks like. And really, if we boil it down, personas help us understand the goals of our audience, a little bit about their desires and what they want, not just from the experience, but maybe from their career, from their personal life. And also personas help us understand some of their constraints. Where are they? Where are these users across your organization? And personas are one way to humanize that. And so when we start to design and build learning experiences, leadership development programs, we're honoring what they need, but not just from a knowledge and skills and content perspective, but really what they want in their career. And also when we think about the modalities that we'll select later, what are some of the things that can get in the way that even though we can design this amazing experience, it's not always the field of dreams. If we build it, they will come. But personas help us give us an early level set of what's realistic. While personas in the learning and development industry are fairly new, they're not new to marketing. And so what you see here on the screen are pictures of my three silly children, Madeline, Eloise, and Conrad. And when you see these pictures, you start to understand what our home life is like. We're silly, we're loud, we come from a mixed football household. And putting these up, when you think about a persona, for me, I'm the mom of three young kids. And if I want to go buy a car, and I go onto the dealership lot, they see me and they see these sillies in tow, they know exactly what I need. I am targeted. They need to sell me a minivan because they know I need to not only transport them, but transport their friends. But because I'm borderline millennial, I don't need the low trim. I need the high car trim that has the wipeable seats, that has the entertainment system in the back, maybe the spoiler so I can be cool, be that cool parent, although I'm not because I still have a minivan. But just understanding a little bit about who I am and what I'm about is a way that organizations, companies can target me so they know what I need. Even though I might not exactly want a minivan, it's something I need. It helps achieve my goals. And there's things that can be done to make it where it meets me where I'm at. And really, learning and development is not much different, because what a persona does is it tells us what our learners see, feel, and experience. And so it humanizes us. And so before I go into some examples, you might be wondering, well, where does the information from the data from a persona come from? And the answer is it depends. And the more data you have about your audience, the more precise your persona will be. I will share that personas are not accurate. They don't reflect real people. But the more research you do on your audience, whether that's through observing them, so you are watching your leaders have one-on-one conversations with their employees, or you have a day in the life where you just shadow the different leaders across your organization, all the way from high performers to average to low performing individuals, and understand just what their day-to-day is like. The more you do that, and you do that across different teams and across different regions, the more precise you'll get. But you might be saying, well, I don't have the ability. Maybe I work for a large global organization, and it's hard to get that close to your end user, which is a real and valid constraint. And so maybe you might do other things. Maybe it's a brainstorm session with your client. Maybe you can bring one or two of those end users in. Maybe there's some subject matter experts that can help you based on their previous experience in that particular role. And you can start to dream up what those personas might be across maybe different leadership segments. So for instance, a new frontline leader might not be one persona, but it could be several personas. You might use it as a way just to help you understand. If you're a program manager for, and you manage leadership development for a particular segment, whether that's supervisors or mid-level managers, put yourself in the learner's shoes. Go on your own career site and look up to see what jobs are available for that level of leader. What is some of their background that your organization is looking for? where are the locations? And you can start to, even with 30 minutes of time, start to kind of script out what, who these people are in your organization, in addition to the qualitative data that you might have at your fingertips, whether that's engagement data or other business data. So let me share a couple examples with you. And again, these are not accurate at all, but they're actually pretty precise based on a lot of the work we do. So here's an example of Sasha. Sasha is a coffee shop manager in Cleveland. She's been working for this organization for 3 years. You can see her education and a little bit about her personal background. But there's some other things that you're starting to see about Sasha. You have her DISC profile, so you can kind of get a sense for her personality. You start to see her goals. There's goals that are career focused. There's goals that are personal focused, having that work-life balance. That part in the middle is a verbatim. So this might be something she would say about her job, where it's multitasking, conflicting demands. There's a lot of expectations. How do you have fun, but also focus on the customer? So how do you develop people when your goals are pretty aggressive? And then you see in the bottom, what are some ways that she prefers to learn? And as you put together this persona, and whether, again, you build that out through observations or you dream it up based on your own experiences, maybe in your organization, you actually had this role for a period of time, you can start to make some assumptions. And then the more people you socialize this with, it'll become more and more precise. And Sasha is only one segment of a store manager. There's probably store managers who have been with the organization for 15 years. They've had their whole career there. And they represent a different age segment. They have different goals. Maybe their goals is they really want to move up, or maybe they don't. And so for any given leadership segment, say like a frontline manager, there might be a couple different personas that you could build. And then as you start to go into designing and building your learning experience, you'll start to see how you might have consistent content and experiences for all of them. And then you can start to target to reach Sasha based on her preferences and then based on the other personas. Here's another. Here's Lucas. He's a new supervisor, so newly promoted as a network engineer. Again, you're seeing his location. He's in Romania, and he's fairly new. So you can, again, start to see his goals. And is this profile a little bit different? Which, again, it's not accurate, and it's an assumption that he's a C, but at least you can start to imagine, as you build out an experience for Lucas, what are some of the learning activities that are going to be really valuable and help him build relevancy and build context as he starts to work with engineers that have more experience than him, but he also has to have some difficult conversations. So you can start to see how that builds out. And then finally, I'll show one more. Here's Mark. He's an experienced leader for a company based out of San Diego, California, maybe near the Ken Blanchard Companies corporate headquarters. And he's a leader of teams. And for him, he's trying to be fair and, spend his time equally amongst his 3 teams, although there's likely one team that he's spending more time with because they're underperforming. So how does he manage the organization as he tries to manage not only teams, but also maybe there's a lot of disruption, which a lot of organizations are inevitably going through. And how does he do that across his learning preferences? And so as you see, when you start to humanize your audience, you just start to think of them in a different way. We can easily come up with content areas and different objectives for a store manager or a new supervisor or an experienced leader. But when you start to put a name and a face and you start to kind of walk through and verbalize some of their thoughts, you start to think about the experience in a little bit more meaningful and personal way. And I'm going to share with you that you can do this too. Again, building personas doesn't have to take hours and weeks and months to do, but it could be a brainstorm exercise you do with your team. here's a framework we are going to be providing you in a toolkit where you can start to build your own persona and start to understand what their work environment is, what are some of the pain points, what some of the motivations they might have, and just use this as a way to get people on the same page. Maybe you're building an experience for one particular role, and if you give this persona, this worksheet to everybody, you're going to start to see that, oh, well, when we think of that role, we're thinking of different people and different tenure and different goals and different preferences. How do we marry that all together? And again, by starting here versus, say, what content we want to put in the program, you're going to start to create a more personal, meaningful experience. So one final thought on personas before we go to the second key is, one, be prepared to be challenged. Again, because personas aren't accurate, it's a really good conversation starter. I created 3 personas for an organization across 3 different levels of leaders, and that was 4 hours of conversation as we started to hone that, debate it, wonder if that's even the right point of view. And again, it's a way to open up the door and move away from just a content focus. If you can and you have the time, do some research, do those observations, do those shadowing. Another great thing about personas too is they don't have to be just something you do at the front end of creating a new experience, but it could be something that you bring back to when you do reviews. It's a checkpoint. It becomes a voice from a feedback perspective. Would Sasha or Lucas like this experience? What are some of the hangups that we could expect them to go through along this journey that we designed for them? And finally, don't think of just your perfect learner. It's always easy to think that Sasha and Lucas and Mark, the 3 I just showed you, are going to be these highly motivated, highest performing individuals in your organization. But in reality, that represents a very small segment of your population. So think of all levels and all areas of performance, because then when you start to think about their constraints and start to think about some of the barriers, you can start to think about the modalities and the intervention and the work that's going to help them actually overcome those barriers. All right. Well, let us jump in to the second key of making learning journeys work, and that's staying with the who. So again, persona isn't just a one-time thing, but it's something that can persevere and again, even grow. Maybe Lucas, for instance, down the road becomes a manager of teams, and knowing what he did in his new supervisor program or experience can blend into his next level and becomes that series of experiences. But what you always want to do is, throughout your design, is try to quantify what do you want your people to say differently, think differently, do differently, and feel differently. When you start to articulate those different levels, you can start to think about, well, how does that script out in a journey? And, journeys are, there's a lot of different learning journeys that you can script out. And I'm going to show you just a couple different examples today. But when you start to even use this, say, think, do, and feel as an exercise, you can say, okay, in order for, say, managers to have difficult conversations with their employees, what must they do? They must be able to demonstrate candor, and they must be curious to draw out the perspectives of their employee. And when you start to qualify it, and again, and not have a content focus, but have an outcome focus and what they're going to do and what they're going to produce, then you can start to craft what content I need. What content already exists? What content do I have to create? What experiences are they going to go through as they experience that content and build those, acquire that knowledge and build those skills? So let's think about Mark. So he's our experienced leader, if you remember. Here's an example of what a journey could look like for Mark. And I'm going to kind of point out a couple different things. Is what this journey does is it puts a series of programs, so a journey. So we'll say this is a formal journey for this level of leader. It puts it on one page. And it says in really simple language the things he's going to do over the course of time. He's going to get into the program in some way. So he gets an email invite. He goes into some learning experience platform where he sees a visual piece of his journey. He's expected to do things like fill out a team assessment. He might go to a formal class where he learns about how to manage teams. And then he's doing things in between formal event to formal events, whether that's having conversations with his cohort, whether it's in different one-on-one or one-to-group conversations, or a webinar in which he's sharing what he's been successfully doing and applying what he's learned, maybe using an online app to help him on the job. And then maybe he goes to another formal experience. And when you start to build out a journey based on Mark's persona, one, you can sort of go back to his learning challenge. For him, it was spending time equally amongst the team. And then that becomes then pieces you can use in, say, the scenarios for his real situations. It could be things that the coach is going to talk through and say, hey, how are you balancing your time? But it also shows at the end, you can sort of see it at the end, is it's not over. But how can you extend the learning from, say, the formal experience to the performance support that he's going to need so that it's not just this 12 weeks, which is, again, a series of programs and interventions over the course of time. But what about week 13? What about week 26 when he still has to have and manage a team that's going through conflict? Where are the tools and how does he continue to foster his own curiosity and build upon what he's learned? So it also starts to think about what's the environment that you need to allow for that to happen. Now, I show this on a PowerPoint screen with cute little icons and little images, but I would even push to say you don't have to do that. In fact, you can have a paper prototype of a journey where you might take a program and you start to use Post-it notes and you start to just outline the journey from start to finish. And when you start to do that, you're going to start to notice where are those barriers that are going to happen. One, for instance, when we were doing some work on paper prototyping for this particular program, is all the steps it took for that particular learner to get into the platform to go see the journey on a one-pager. So it was not just the email invite, but the email invite went to a login screen of which he logged in. He went to another screen. He had to go to another screen. And then he finally got into the platform that he needed to get to. And then he had to go find and search for the journey. And then finally, he was able to see his journey. And so those first 3 Post-its actually reflected like 15 steps, of which he got very D2, very disillusioned. And he's like, forget it. I'm not really interested. And so when you start to script out and even paper prototype a learning journey, you're going to start to see the areas where you might unintentionally cause disengagement and you might have to optimize a process or find a workaround for that process. For instance, maybe that learning journey one-pager, the visual of the program, is attached to that email invite, so he gets it right away. All right, so now I'm going to walk through, when we think about the second key of learning journeys need to stay with the who, what are some of those heuristics that you're going to want to consider as you go through that framework? So I'm going to walk you through 10. I'm going to share another resource with you, and then I'm going to show another example from Lucas on how we've addressed each of those 10 best practices. All right, so there are 10, and these aren't the only 10. They're probably my top 10. And there's other frameworks and different ideation exercises, whether you're using a framework like the AGES neuroscience model or 5 guiding principles to making relevant programs. There's a lot of different frames in which how you want to think of designing a learning journey. And again, whether that's the single program or a series of programs or across different levels of leadership. So the first one is you want to make sure there's a common language across the journey from start to finish. So for instance, what is that red thread that is reinforced during the entire journey? What are the competencies, the content, the theme that you might create to ensure that it's something that, as they see it, it's something that continues to bubble up and it becomes consistent. The second is making sure that the experience feels personalized and targeted. So again, we might think of you're building a leadership development program for one level of leader, but within that level, within that segment, you probably have 4 to 6 different personas, different age demographics, different regions. And so when you think about building personalized learning, what are the things that you can do to make it feel like it's designed exactly for them? This is where you think about, where does the learner choice? How is the experience look and feel different in the US versus APAC? And so you can start to think about, based on those segments, even though there's some core pieces you're going to want to have those individuals go through so you set that common language, where are the opportunities for them to select, opt in, make choices, go deeper, maybe get role or functional specific information so that it doesn't seem like it's a program that's a one size fits all, but there are elements of personalization and individualization. One way to do that is to give them opportunities to be connected with each other. So what are you doing within that experience where they could share what they've learned? Maybe that's going to be a face-to-face, deep immersive workshop. Maybe it's something that happens in between those instructor-led or virtual instructor-led small cohort activities where they could share one-on-one with a coach, or maybe it's group coaching. Maybe as you start to invest in different learning experience platforms, you are creating activities and tasks where they're going into those platforms and answering prompts and to different questions or discussion threads or different online activities. And so you start to think about, how do you bring people together? And, in today's world, it's not always possible to bring people together face to face. And so, but you still want to ensure that it's collaborative and they're learning with each other, because that time and time again comes up as something that people generally need and they want to do. And so how are you addressing that? Next is you're actually giving them some time. A lot of programs and learning journeys, you're trying to shove it all in, right? You have to not only talk about how to build trust and how to manage conflict and how to have effective one-on-one conversations, but you're also trying to talk about how you interview and acquire new talent and manage performance and coach. And you only have 2 days. And so how do you shove it all in? And so the question is not how do you get more in, but how do you give those learners a time to reflect? How do you allow them to generate insights along the way? And, that could be spacing content and spacing experiences across, over weeks or months even, but allowing that learner, that leader, the time to think. We don't have a lot of that. And even how can the program and experience encourage that individual the time to think about what they've learned? And you can't do that when you're continually asking them to do a ton of activities. And so what's that space? Next is allowing them to self-assess and diagnose. This really goes hand in hand with the personalized and targeted. But where in the journey, maybe that's on the front end, maybe it's on the back end, maybe it's in the middle, and maybe it's all three, is you're giving them that aha moment. Where can they receive those insights, maybe from an objective third party, whether that's an assessment, whether that's a coach, whether that's a manager or a mentor, where they can get some feedback on their current behaviors and habits. Something that gives that leader to say, oh, I think I'm a good coach, but wait, I actually am not coaching at all. I'm just telling. And so how do you give them those, again, those aha or those moments for them to pause and say, maybe I do need to change and I do need to persevere with this experience. The next is that balance between push and pull. And when I say push and pull, I mean content that's given to them, that's served to them, whether that's through the formal events like the instructor-led training, whether that's through email and targeted communications, but also what are they going to pull? Why are they going to go into your learning experience platform to get information or to come get content because they had some moment, like maybe a self-assessment, where they're like, whoa, I need to learn more about this. And it also is that chance to blend what's required based on the expectations and the skill set that you want your leaders, your learners to have, versus those areas where they can, that's more recommended versus optional. And so what's going to grab their attention so they want to come into this experience? And, there's a lot of different ways to do that, whether it's around marketing, but one way is to simply make it real. How does this show up on the job? How is this connected to their work and personal life? This might be a chance, again, where you can bring in some of those emotional connections to their daily work. So for instance, if your managers feel like they have no time because maybe they're working managers and they have their own tasks and they're trying to manage a team of people, how can this experience help them manage their time better so they become better delegators, they're able to flex their leadership style amongst their team. And so by learning new skills, and even though maybe having effective one-on-ones might seem counterintuitive because that's more time, by doing that on a regular basis, you create self-reliant achievers on their team, and they're having to get less in the weeds. And so creating those really succinct ways for the leader on why, and then how it shows up in their day-to-day job or in their day-to-day life. And then keeping others informed. We want to ensure that a learning journey isn't just a vacuum where the participant just gets all this information, goes through these wonderful experiences, and a lot of you don't want them to walk away to say, gosh, I wish my manager had that, or gosh, my employees need that, but that's not going to be a possibility. So how do you keep others, so whether it's the participant's leader or even the participant's team, informed and aware? What are the things that you can build and design to integrate this across different levels of leadership, and again, help bring in that common language? And then finally, make it easy. Again, like I showed you in that paper prototype, try to get content and experiences to the people where they're at, whether that's if they're in sales and they're on the road, if they're in front of their computer, if they're in front of a point of sale. How do you get them the content and the experiences and the tools and resources they need when they need it? And then finally, and we'll kind of talk about this more in key 3, is what are you measuring? what are the leading indicators that are demonstrating that this initiative is moving the needle? For a lot of us in L&D and HR, we might talk about engagement and we might talk about retention. But from a stakeholder or a business perspective, you might need to think about sales and reduce call handling time or customer experience. And so what are the things that are happening in those leading indicators that, like such as engagement, that are leading to better outcomes so that you can actually speak in the language that your stakeholders most care about? So let's kind of walk through an example. I'm going to provide you this as well. So this is another tool in your toolkit, those 10 different best practices and even some questions underneath to help you sort of qualify what I mean by those questions. So that's going to be another tool in your toolbox. And really quickly, let's go back to Lucas. So Lucas was our new frontline leader, transitioning to a new role. His team has a mix of senior and junior people. And, what does his journey look like? And again, he might be doing some pieces on the job, maybe some formal, maybe some online, maybe some debriefs with a facilitator where he can share some of these challenges. And then doing things along the way where it meets him where he's at. If we actually did this exercise and sort of script it out, what are the things that we need to do to create a common language? So if we do say that SL2 is a key part of his experience, how can the competencies of the organization be tied to SL2? So it's not just SL2 is the training in his new leader program, but it's the leadership language that his company is using as the how to have effective one-on-ones. You can see under keeping others informed that his manager has a companion guide to this whole experience. And so week over week, there's conversation starters, and there's things that his manager is getting along the way to inform of progress, and even tools that Lucas can use to share with his team about what he's learning and what his expectations are of his employees as he's gaining all these new knowledge and skills. And so as you start to do this work, and again, you can just use this as a brainstorm activity. When you start to build out your experience, it's a level set. You're level setting against the persona. You're level setting against Lucas's journey to say, am I really making sure that I'm building a relevant contextual experience that's going to make an impact? So let's sort of talk about that third key, which is, again, you're talking about outcomes, you have an impact. And when I say impact, it's not just about completions, but why outcomes? Why do we want to better understand what people are producing? Because effectively, it's what matters in measurements. And there's really three areas that when you think about measurement, you want to consider as you consider some of these large investments in leadership development. But you do want to know that it happens. That's still important. And it's still important that people like it. It's good to have a high net promoter score of your program. And because if people like it, then they're compelled to come back. And so that's, even though it might be the lowest level from an evaluation perspective, it's still important to know what people think, and it's a great way to get feedback. But also, and more importantly, is job impact. And so if they go through this experience, again, it goes back to that say, think, do, say, feel, think, do exercise, is that something changes. There is an impact on the job. Their behavior changes, right? That's level 3 along the Kirkpatrick's evaluation. There is an impact, and they're doing something. They're applying these skills, and for them, it's showing up in the job. And maybe that's where they're sharing testimonials. They're, you're doing post surveys, maybe 30, 60, 90, 120 days out, and you're measuring their confidence and their competence around applying these different skills on the job. And then finally, there's results. You're seeing the business change. You're seeing the organization. You have quantitative evidence that the organization is having improved results as a contributing factor to the experience of the learning journey you designed. Here's an example, actually, of how this applies in an organization. And if you want to learn more, there is a webinar that my colleague Jim Irvine has done on ROI. There's a white paper. And so I highly suggest, if you have a heart for measurements, there is plenty more to dive deeper on. But simply, when you start to think about these 6 different levels, and yes, there's 6, and Dr. Paul Leone has research on that 6th level around the right climate and environment that helps maximize impact. is, and you start to share these across these different levels, you can share that your learning journey makes sense, and it's going to garner more investments. And I want to just share before I wrap up and take some questions is, when we think about learning journeys, and you might be thinking, I'm having to go digital, or it's harder to get people face to face, or maybe I'm under a travel ban right now, which is a very real possibility. I'm having a hard time making the same impact. And what I encourage you to do is to continue to think about your why. Can you start to think about why it's important to have outcomes, again, which is the production of what your people produce, and then that's based on the tasks and the behaviors they show, is it helps reinforce our why. Whether it's a digital program and you're bringing people together virtually, whether it's a deep immersive workshop, our why still is the same. It's regular positive conversations between managers and their employees, building relationships that are built on trust and collaboration. And even though the how might change, when you start to use a frame like those 10 best practices of learning journeys, when you start to build personas, you can still keep this as your why, or whatever your why is, of why you're building something and what you want people to feel, right? These are feel statements. And if you want people to feel this way, but you have constraints around the modalities, start to think about how can we still do our best to get as close as possible to that workshop or face-to-face experience. And so that's really how I wanted to end today before I jump into questions. One final piece in the toolkit that I'm providing, I have some resources that I'm sharing with you, some of my favorite people I follow on Twitter, some great blogs, another article that even has a spreadsheet on building on a learning journey. There's a ton of stuff on the public ecosystem, that internet sphere that you can get on and jump in on. And I just want to thank you. I know you are probably busy, and so to take the hour to get this far, I'm grateful. I'm humbled, and I look forward to sharing with you. If you have any questions, it is now time to open up. I think I got it in 50 minutes. What do you think, Dave? Pretty close?
Britney, you did perfect, and folks have been very just writing down notes as fast as they possibly can. So one of the things that we wanted to let everyone know is the session has been recorded. There will be links to all of the resources that Britney's talked about. And we'll also be sending you a follow-up email where you'll be able to access that. We do have a number of questions that you've been busy sending to me, and I've been writing them down while Britney's been working through her presentation. We'll go through as many of those questions as we can, and do feel free to go ahead and use the Q&A panel here on the On24 platform to ask additional questions, and we'll see how many of these we can get through. We'll probably have to some degree, do kind of soundbite answers, I think, here, Britney, for a lot of these. But the good news is you see here on this slide that we're looking at right now, for any questions that we are not able to get to, or if it's a more extensive question, you can send an email to webinars, plural, webinars, at kenblanchard.com. And I'll go ahead and forward your email to Britney, and we'll get you a personalized answer. Well, Britney, it looks like you got a little drink of water there, so you're ready to go. Here's the first question that came in. Do learning journeys scale? The idea was if you've got a large employee population, you're thinking about, oh my gosh, I got 1,000 employees. You're not wanting me to do a persona for everyone, are you? How do personas work and learning journeys work with large organizations?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes. And so I'll sort of answer it kind of in part one around personas, and then part two, how do you scale? So how do you reach those thousands of people? You're right. You're not going to be able to create a persona for every single nuance. But in any organization, we'll say global organization, for maybe a level of leader, you probably have anywhere from 4 to 6 personas. And those personas can be built when you start to bring together a series of like segments. So segments could be age, tenure, function, specific role, even maybe in, related to function or role, but like how does their conversation show up? So, for instance, if you're looking to train sales managers, you might have sales managers whose primary conversation with the customer is face to face, like they're a road warrior. Could be call center based or contact center. It could be retail and they're in a storefront, which is still face to face, but they're in a store setting versus on the road. And so you might start to think about, okay, in any given leadership segment, I might have some big chunks, and then you can start to build personas that sort of combine those chunks. So for that sales audience, for instance, I might have one persona where it's a retail sales manager who's younger, and maybe like a millennial demographic or Gen Z, and they're managing for the first time. Maybe you have a persona who he's a more senior sales manager, but they're in the same maybe functional role, and he's having face-to-face conversations, and he's on the road selling, meeting with his team, and the conversation looks and feels different. And then there's the manager who's a call center manager, but still in charge of sales, right? Maybe they're inbound or outbound sales. And so maybe across you have like 4 or 6. And if you build those 4 to 6 personas, sort of combining those different segments, you'll kind of hit on, not all certainly, but many of the goals and needs and desires across all of them. And then when you look at those 4 or 6 or so as an aggregate, you can say, what kind of experience can I build to address all of these people? And you're going to laugh and you're going to probably say none, because it's not a one size approach. But you can say across all of these roles, what are some common things that I know they need to do as a sales leader? And that's going to be coaching, for instance. And so there might be a core, coaching essentials where they learn how to connect and focus and activate their employees and have those deep coaching conversations. But how you deliver that to the audience might, again, depend on scale. So if you have this global organization and the face-to-face and the call center, they're all in the same segment and you're having to care for all of them, that goes into modality. So you might think of, how can I have content that's available on a mobile device, on a tablet? So you're thinking about responsive design of content. That sales leader who's the road warrior, for instance, isn't going to have an easy time, most likely, getting to the LMS because they're not on a laptop, they're on a phone or a tablet. So how can we get to them easier than maybe, say, someone who's at their desk? And then from a scale perspective, this is where the learning technology conversation becomes so much more important, is how do I deliver maybe it's collaborative online learning to large cohorts using platforms that are meant for that, like MOOC platforms or corporate learning program delivery platforms. There's several out there that can actually reach people at scale, but still have those experiences where they can connect and collaborate. It's a great question. Great 2 questions.
That's great. Thank you for that, Britney. Another question came in. We've got an L&D audience here, but a lot of us are thinking, gosh, how do I sell learning journeys to the senior leadership in my organization? What's some tips and techniques that you could share with people as far as how do you sell this to others in the organization around the concept of creating learning journeys?
Yeah, that is a great question. And, I get the chance to support a lot of our sales folks in the field. And I have seen it firsthand, but even just taking the time, whether or not you have the basis or you have the, dream up a persona, create a persona, maybe 2 for your level of leader, and create a visual journey. even in, people tend to respond pretty positively to paper prototyping. So even that picture I think I showed you on manager fundamentals, people like looking at Post-it notes. And so script it out. Say, here's my vision. Executives want to see something quick. They want to see something visual. And so the more you can take your vision and the journey that you want to have, and which you probably know has some level of investment, if you can say, this is my vision and this is what I hypothesize that this vision is going to impact, and so start to think about what are the things that, if we invest in this program or this experience or this journey, and because if it's going to be anything that, even if it's online, if you're managing, globally and you have thousands of people, it's still going to be some level of investment. Is, I believe, and you share what you believe. If we do this and we do this right, we're going to have better customer experience scores. We're going to have better sales, because when you do this, this is what happens, and you start to share that research.
That's great. Thank you, Britney. Well, I can see that we are going to have a lot of unanswered questions. So I want everyone just to take a look again at that email address, webinars@kenblanchard.com. We've got a couple of questions that we won't be able to get to today. I'm just going to be able to ask Britney 2 more questions. But do send your question to webinars@kenblanchard.com, and we'll make sure that you get an answer to the question that's most pressing right now. The next to last question that I wanted to ask you, Britney, is the idea, can you create personas for a group as opposed to just an individual? And I was just wondering, has that ever come up before? Have you ever seen that done?
Yeah, I think you can. I would say the persona for a group, you can. I think when you have the face and the name, and whether it's age or tenure, the image itself will reflect age. If you have it by a group, it's not as human. I will say, like in my past, when I've used personas, not just in the upfront design, but it's woven throughout, and it's a part of the feedback cycle. It's a part of the the next iteration. Is these people tend to actually become real. Ironically, really quickly, there was a persona we built, and his name was Dave. And Dave, this is not you, but
No, I don't think so.
He was this Dave was the leader who was kind of the, he didn't care. He was the one that said, everyone around me has the problem. Why are all these people coming to my office crying? They need emotional intelligence training. I don't. So again, not you at all, but everyone said, had a manager like that in their life where, they were, and so Dave became this kind of like, everyone has a Dave, or what's Dave think, or how do we get Dave interested in this? And so even though Dave probably represents a group and a lot of different things, or, he was like a middle level manager, he became this almost gut check against the work we were doing to say, all right, is this gonna have, pass the Dave test? And it helped us understand, like, what do we need to do to engage someone like him, because he was still really a valuable part of that organization.
Well, that's so funny. For those of you that are familiar with Blanchard's SL2 leadership development program, there's a video, and the same thing has happened with one of the characters. Elliot is in this thing, and he's a very difficult personality, and so a lot of folks like don't go all Elliot on me or something like that. So I understand exactly how that can happen. Well, Britney, It has been a fun, fast hour. I just want to give you a chance to kind of share with folks, if there's one thing you'd hope that folks would take away remembering from today's presentation, what would it be?
Oh, I think you can do this. These are tools you have at your fingertips. Don't wait. Take an hour, and you'd be surprised and amazed at what you can dream up with when you start using these tools. So I hope you feel empowered and excited. And thanks again.
Well, thank you, Brittany, for a wonderful 60-minute presentation on learning journeys, 3 keys to making them work. It's been great being with you. It's been great being with all of you in the L&D community for this Blanchard webinar. We hope that you'll join us again for another webinar in the near future. We do them every month. Be on the lookout when you get that follow-up email. We'll give you some information on how you can join us again. Thanks for joining us, Brittany. Thanks for leading us through this, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. That does conclude today's webinar.
Bye.